My name is Julia Miller, and this is my project presentation on hedonistic killers. So what exactly is a hedonistic killer? A hedonistic killer is a killer who murders for the thrill, whether that be sexual arousal, gratification, or the consequences associated with the act. In fact, about 50% of all serial killers have a motive of sex for their murder, and there are usually other underlying motives such as power, money, or etc. So a lot of times these murderers are killing for sex. There may be some underlying motives as well, but their main goal is murdering to have sex. So when you think about hedonists, there are three different types. You have lust-oriented, which are motivated by sexual arousal and or gratification. You have your thrill-oriented killers who are motivated by beating and torturing their victims, and you have your comfort-oriented killers who are motivated by comfort or money. So diving a little deeper into lust-oriented killers, because that's where you're going to see the majority of your killers. These killers, like I said, are motivated by sexual arousal and or gratification. These lust-oriented killers can be further categorized into disorganized asocial killers and organized non-social killers. So looking a little bit deeper into the disorganized asocial lust killers, so these killers kind of go with what the name says. They're very disorganized. These individuals typically have below average intelligence. They are socially and sexually inadequate. They experience a lot of anxiety during the crime. And as far as their personal life, these people typically live alone near the crime scene. Um, they don't really have a partner that they live with. They're kind of just by themselves, and they experience some drastic behavior changes. So the things you're going to see at an asocial lust killer's crime scene are, spontaneous acts. The victim is going to be random. It's not going to be a specific target. They're going to be very messy at the crime scene. They're going to leave the body and some evidence behind, making them a kind of disorganized killer. On the flip side, you have the organized, non-social lust killers. So the traits of these people, they're typically pretty average to above average intelligence. They are socially and sexually adequate. And they typically live your more normal style type of life. They have a job, they have a partner, they have a job, they have a car, and they'll typically follow their own crimes in the news. They'll kind of be checking updates to see where they're at on their investigation. Um, and these type of crime scenes, they're going to be more cleaned up. They're going to be less easy to follow. So it's going to be planned. There's going to be a targeted victim. They're going to make their victim be submissive. These type of killers like to be in power. And they're typically, like I said, very good about cleaning up their crime scene. They don't really leave the body or evidence behind, so it's a lot easier to track these type of killers. Here are just two examples real quick of different types of crime scenes. So the first one on the top left is going to be your organized crime scene. As you can see, there's no body, really no evidence. There are a couple evidence markers. The bed's a little disheveled, but besides the fact that it looks like someone lives there, there's not really much evidence it looks like for a murder. Now, on the other hand, the picture on the bottom right, you can see there's strings. It looks like maybe some clothing articles left behind on the floor there. So that would be more of your disorganized killer. They're leaving pieces of evidence behind. It's going to make it maybe a little easier to catch them. There may be some of their DNA on these pieces of fabric. So now for some examples of hedonistic serial killers. So the first one and probably the most famous is Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer. Um, he had about 17 victims, maybe even more. He only confessed to about 17. So he was a thrill-oriented killer. He liked to torture, mutilate, and abuse the corpses of his victims. And he was a disorganized asocial killer. But the crime scene was his bedroom. He would lure all these guys into his bedroom and then he would kill them and store their bodies in there. So that kind of makes him disorganized. However, since the crime scene was his bedroom and no one else was really in there, no one was aware of that. So just some pictures for reference. Here is a barrel that I believe he stored body parts in, some tools that he used to dismember the bodies, and also his freezer that had body parts in it as well. Another hedonistic serial killer is Jerry Brudos, also known as the shoe fetish slayer. He had about 4 victims, and he was also a thrill-oriented killer. He strangled, photographed, and mutilated his victims. And he was called the shoe fetish slayer because he dismembered and saved women's breasts and as well as their feet for his sexual arousal, which makes him a lust-oriented killer. And the final example we have is Mr. Edmund Kemper. He had killed about 10 victims, and he was a necrophiliac who was into decapitating his victims as well as dismembering them. So he was a lust as well as a thrill-oriented killer. He typically picked up female hitchhikers because they were easy targets, and he again was one of those disorganized asocial killers. He would commit the crimes at his house and dispose of the bodies near of him. One of the skulls he even buried like in his mother's backyard. So he kept his evidence kind of close to him, which is a trait of those disorganized killers. Here are just a couple pictures of our killers. So on the far left, we have Edmund Kemper, and then in the middle we have Jerry Brudos, and on the far right we have Jeffrey Dahmer. So the big question is, why do these killers do this? That's one of the things we're trying to figure out with this class, figure out the sociology behind all of it. So many of these killers actually endured some kind of trauma as young kids that just kind of led to their current situation now, and that's not always the case, but that is a very common situation for these type of killers. As we have learned in lecture, murdering can be addictive. So once these serial killers get the rush that they're searching for when they get that kill, they want to feel that rush again. So it kind of leads to this cycle of, murdering to feel that rush, and then they lose that rush, and then they feel that they need to kill again to feel that rush again. Here's just a nice little graphic that shows reasons why serial killers kill. As you can see, the top reason there is for enjoyment, among other reasons, but enjoyment will be the top one, and that would, be our hedonistic killers who kill for lust or thrill or whatnot. So why is this a problem? Well, as we know, murder alone is a deviant behavior, but being a hedonistic killer is even more deviant, because not only are you, committing a crime, but you're also doing things to that corpse that you probably, you shouldn't be doing. So by definition, deviance is something out of the social norm, and obviously murder is not in the social norm, which makes murder a deviant behavior. So hedonistic killers in the law. Most hedonistic murders are first-degree murders due to the immense amount of space, supplies, and time needed to do the work. So that makes it a premeditated murder, and any premeditated murder is first-degree murder. A definition from Keith Blinn in 1949 said any premeditated murder shall be murder in the first degree, but also any murder paired with any other charges. There were certain charges listed, such as rape, arson, burglary. So we discussed, like I said, how murder can be addicting, and after a few first-degree murder charges, your sentencing starts to skyrocket. So, for example, Ed Kemper got 8 consecutive life sentences, Jeffrey Dahmer got 15, and Jerry Brudos got 3. Just for reference, some other popular murderers, their sentencings. The BTK killer got 10 consecutive life sentences, while John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy both got death by lethal injection. Just because I think it's kind of cool, here is the lethal injection table, as well as kind of what they use to do that injection. So they use midazolam to sedate you, vecuronium to paralyze you, and then potassium to start your heart, or stop your heart, my apologies. So a little bit of a recap, just to kind of go over the most important points that we covered in this presentation. A hedonistic killer is someone who kills for thrill. It can be sexually driven, which is lust-oriented. It can be torture-driven, which is thrill-oriented. Or it can be comfort and money-driven, which is comfort-oriented. There are 2 types of lust killers, which are your disorganized asocial and organized non-social. And some famous hedonistic killers include Jeffrey Dahmer, Jerry Brudos, and Ed Kemper. So after completing this project, obviously I'm disturbed that there are people out there in the world who will do this. It's a pretty gross thing to be doing. The thought of a mutilated body to me is pretty disgusting. I can't ever imagine doing that to someone. However, I do think that this deviant behavior is very extremely interesting to learn about, and the sociology behind it is very interesting too. I really enjoyed doing this project as I am a true crime lover, and I thought this was a lot of fun. So here are all of my references, and thank you.